The Tyll Show on Starcom Radio Network. Our guest has done incredible research and has written a 5-star rated thriller. It is a work of fiction, but it touches on the missing treasures from World War II. Published in 2015 and rated 5 stars by readers, Kendall Smith's book is garnering wide interest based on events unfolding in Europe. A massive expedition is underway to find gold bullion that was stolen and lost by the Nazis. His study and understanding of the subject will give us a unique perspective on all this. And I'll tell you what, I'm a big fan of those shows on the History Channel, American Heroes Channel at night, World War II. They even now have found color versions of some of the film. So the war and the players you may think are well known to you. What you don't know about World War II might be the most interesting. Kendall Smith joins us on the Ed Tyll Show, Starcom Radio Network. Kendall, how are you today?
Doing well. How you doing?
I'm excited because I thought I knew a ton about World War II, and I'm anxious to know what your research and what current discoveries are there to teach us. So let's start out. How did you get interested in all of this? Are you a history teacher first?
No, I'm not a history teacher, but I'm definitely a history buff. And thanks again for having me on the show and saying hello to all your listeners out there. But how I got my start, it really had to do with my family and my grandfather's role in World War II.
Wow.
And as I grew up, I learned stories about his experiences over there, really secondhand from my grandmother because he passed away when I was a little too young.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a member of the 7th and 8th Armored Divisions, and one story stood out in my mind, and it's always resonated, is he was part of the Army group that liberated one of the concentration camps.
Mm. Wow.
And,
yeah, that was a whole... The world changed when that happened, right? When the world finally saw and heard reports on what was discovered, it had all been some kind of academic atrocity from afar. But once it was understood what was really going on over there, I think the world changed a little bit.
Yeah, it did, and it really brought a moral spotlight on what travesties had taken place. And as I researched more of this, the story of Ball 2112, in my interest, it began with a lot of research looking at different books, different history texts, different studies, made them by PBS, by Frontline. And the more I investigated and peeled back the onion, it's unbelievable the level of theft that took place by the Nazi regime. And it's fascinating when you dig even further, where it's not even purely about gold or taking possessions of those in the concentration camps. It went into, and I was studying how the government of Germany at the time would swoop into countries and confiscate their entire net worth through their gold deposits that represented the value of their currencies. It was all across Europe, and there was no stone left unturned.
Got it. Now, how was this different from what we've seen long before World War II in history, that plundering the vanquished, to the victor go the spoils, is the expectation, right? I mean, civilizations that preceded ours, it was always the conqueror took everything and subjugated the conquered. So what's a little bit different about what happened in World War II in terms of it being, at a different level, being more pervasive than ever understood before?
I think, yeah, you're spot on in terms of the plundering. It's actually funny you mention that because there are stories in medieval times when the Ottomans were fighting the Europeans that Ottoman troops were actually compensated by the wealth they were able to loot in Europe, and it's gone on for centuries. I think World War II was different for two reasons. One, Germany had a massive chip on their shoulder from the Treaty of Versailles that was signed in 1921 that basically laid out the terms of significant compensation to the victors. There were restrictions placed on their armies, on their transportation. There was a significant number of constrictions on the overall country. And Hitler, being actually a frontline troop in World War I, he obviously set his sights on getting his revenge, and when he did so, he wanted to really center Europe as the leading authority, and part of that relates to his obsession with artwork. He was a failed art student growing up. His goal was to sweep all the museums across Europe and to create one massive, huge museum in his hometown in Austria. The wealth factor, it stems, I think, from the Nazi psychology, where there were, at the highest levels, it was all about plundering. It was all about taking what loot from those countries that were conquered, and it was widespread. I mean, I think today there's still 120,000 missing pieces of acclaimed artwork that have never been rediscovered or been returned. They're out there somewhere, and we have yet to find them, which is kind of the mystery that got me involved in the story in 2112 and the mysteries of World War II Europe.
You know, I'm curious now, what came first, the idea to tell a story, to write a novel, or your captivation with these events? Were you already on the road to writing, and then this came in and amped you up, or was this really the spark that drove you to write Vault 2112?
Well, it stems, I think, first from my family experience and the history, and then with any writer, there's usually a light bulb that goes off. You know, is there a story you can put behind a really famous overall subject? And World War II obviously is, you know, I've been studying it for years, and I'm enthralled by the subject and always interested to learn more. But once you start associating characters and situations and the protagonists, the antagonists, and build a plot around that, then you can spec things out and then apply history lessons to that. So before I even set out to write the book, I had the plot, I had the characters, and that takes time, and it's a matter of inspiration and doing a number of drafts and then getting it dialed in correct for the reader. Right. The draft, the rewrite,
yeah. Then the other rewrite, then one more rewrite. You blend history in fiction, and that's got to be joyful just for its own sake, to have reality and imagination interwoven. Can you talk about that experience when you're working with facts, but you're telling a story that isn't necessarily a story that's factual or grounded, but it's based in an environment that's wholly important to history? What's that like when you're tapping away on the keys? How does that make you feel?
Well, it's funny because as an author, you want to give the most authentic experience to the reader you can. And part of that is getting your facts straight, having locations correct, and making sure that if you've been there, what's the climate like? What are the people like? What are the roads like if you're doing, I have a car chase in one of the scenes, for example, between protagonists and antagonists. But it really comes down to that first draft and making a little asterisk and going back and saying, look, I've got to dive deeper on this. I've got to know the net worth of the value of what is discovered in my story. It's basically a hidden cache of wealth, and I won't reveal what that is, but because I don't want to spoil the story. But you should know what is that worth, and know what the price of gold is on the market at the time, and what that could buy. How do you transport what you found out? What are the legal implications if you bring something back like that to the United States? What are all those avenues so that, not to dive too deep on a certain legal or transportation element, but you've got to have some concept of that so the reader goes, okay, I can relate to that. That sounds like a realistic element, so you don't lose that reader's interest throughout the story. So it's writing and then backing it up with facts and then just tweaking it so it's just a fun piece to read.
Now, I was asking right about the joy of this, and I appreciate that, but I also have from so many authors, whether they've been on the show or we've just watched them describe how difficult it is to write something big like this. This is a big subject, as you just pointed out. So many people are going to come to it with some knowledge of it. What were your real toughest moments in the writing? When did you feel the most challenged?
I think for me, it's providing and setting up the characters so you can relate to them. I think the story's about the treasure, the travel, the conflict between good and bad. That, for me, it's not as challenging. It's getting that character that someone can relate to, that's based on reality. The dialogue is honest and authentic. And, again, it's a rewrite. It's just reading it out loud. It's actually having people critique your book professionally. Say, look, here's where you're deficient. Here's where you need to improve your game. And that probably is the hardest thing. Is every writer has their weak spot, and you don't find that out unless you have honest opinions being given to you in the critique before it's published.
Sure. Now, the question that immediately comes to me, since you're dealing in this context of World War II, almost every storyteller, when they come to the bad guys, it is very difficult sometimes to find and get readers or viewers to connect with the humanity of a villain. What was it like writing in the context of the Nazis? Were you actually able, to your own satisfaction, to demonstrate something more than the one-dimensional overall evil and show, that they were more than they might be seen? I think the new phrase is at 35,000 feet. When you take the long view, you say, oh, there's the bad guys, there's the good guys. Oh, they had a battle. Oh, the bad guys are lying down. I guess the good guys are going to plant their flag. When you get down to ground level, they're still people, right? They've still come from families. Yep. They still have had some of the same experiences that the good guys have had. Talk about that a little bit, making into real people this monolithic concept of the Nazis.
I think the best way to describe how I approach that is there is a Nazi connection I'll talk about, but the first thing is when you're talking about the villains or the antagonists are, what motivates them and where are they in the stage of life? What are they doing when they get the news that something their grandfathers found and was stolen, that they believe they had entitled rights to? Where does that element of the story interact with their lives? So I try to present people that one character was suffering from poverty. Yeah, sure. So the connection was generational. The story is set in the modern day, and these characters, one's in Brazil, one's still in Germany, another one was a former Stasi member who's suffering from poverty. And I define the four of these characters as descendant Nazis and kind of lump them together. And what brings them together is this connection that is this hidden cache of valuables that is basically unlocked when the World War II heroic grandfather, an American soldier, bequeaths the contents in this secret Swiss vault to his grandsons. And all of a sudden, the antagonists get triggered that this is happening, and they know it's at stake. So it's taking people out of real-world situations, putting them sometimes in awkward situations where they're trying to repossess or take back what was stolen from their grandfathers back in the day. So that human element gets back to the fact that when you're talking about any kind of war loot, it doesn't matter what side you're on. Any possession of war loot in this day and age is a sin on some level,
right,
to be honest.
Right.
And then at one point in the story, I try to really clash, really who's the good guys and the bad guys. And obviously, the good guys, they win out. But there's a little moral story in there. And at the end of the day, I'll be honest, like when you're talking about Nazis, it's a great bullseye to hit, a great pinata to whack because they're wholly unloved. And
right.
And the descendant Nazi angle is probably one of the easiest layups in terms of figuring out that antagonistic position in the story.
Right. Now, I'm curious, have you gotten any feedback where people go easy now, you're treading on some very, very sensitive material? Have you gotten that feedback from people who are like, I don't know, what are we saying here? Because I know that the emotions provoked from especially, as you point out, grandchildren of those who went through this, very, very sensitive. What does that do? What burden or what responsibility does that vest in the author in such a sensitivity-ridden environment such as World War II?
Well, it's funny you bring that up, and it was a real challenge for me because at the end of the story, I rewrote the ending 3 or 4 times, and the ethical element really trumps everything else at the end. And it comes down to what is the right decision for history, for the people who suffered, and for the wealth that was procured and lost, and what is the right decision to do. And I actually wrote a story and published it on BuzzFeed titled An Ethical Dilemma, Nazi Treasure and Historical Consequences, and I spoke to how the ending of the story, I had to end the story on an ethical solution, for lack of a better phrase.
Right.
And it is a sensitive subject, but I think the important thing, and what I point out in this article, I think people take away from the novel is there's a major history lesson here that cannot get lost. I can talk about in this article how there's a Nazi gold train that's been rumored for over a year and a half now in an area called in Lower Silesia, Poland, which could contain literally hundreds of millions of dollars of gold bullion. And if discovered, do you disperse the wealth, or do you show people this is what happened in World War II? It's the most fantastic history lesson to really bring to life what transpired. And that's part of the story, and that's part of kind of my frame of mind, so that I can live with myself, and that my protagonists in the story are not ending. They don't end up being the ultimate villain.
Wow. That is, I mean, you have my complete admiration for that, because that is really the trickiest part of telling history, is not to cast your own personal judgment, but allow people to see for themselves and assess for themselves the magnitude, the importance of the story that you're telling. That's really powerful stuff, man. What from some other writers I've had on, by the time I get them on the show, they invariably tell me they're already on another project. Has this blood, sweat, and tears of Vault 2112, which, by the way, I should be mentioning, easy to get on Amazon. And I'm sure you can give us other references for that. But for people who love World War II, you should be ordering this book already, since we've been on the air chatting here about it for the last 20 minutes. Did this experience give birth to your next project, or are you kind of in a little bit of a refractory period where you don't want to start anything? You want to really let this one run out of your system. What's that creative process like for you?
I would honestly say as soon as the first book is put to bed and it's been completely buttoned up, it's at the publisher, and Percussion Publishing is the author of Vault 2112. The next project's already in my head. I already have 5 things lined up in terms of spec'd out. I have published a novella that came out in July. I co-authored it with my fellow author, Presley Acuna, and it's actually out now. It's a satire, political humor titled Trumpicana, and that's also out on Amazon, and it's a it's a humorous take on the election cycle, Donald Trump himself, a little tongue-in-cheek.
Right.
That's a story, 100 pages, that's out now. So that came out. We put that project from start to finish in 2 months to be in tune with the election cycle.
Wow. All right. You know, Presley has been on the show, so I'm glad to know that. What's your 30-second take on what we're witnessing, and really in the last couple of days now? Last night was their Commander-in-Chief Forum. It's also a race that's kind of evened up in the last 10 days. There was the post-convention bump for both of them. But where we're at right now in the final 60 days going into the election, how do you see what is going on? How do you see what they've been calling the sprint to Election Day? How does it size up for you?
I think there's many chapters left to go through to see what happens. We have the debates. We have more stories uncovering every day about the backgrounds of both candidates. This really is kind of a sprint to the end, but when you think about it, it's almost 2 solid months, which in media time is like 5 years.
Right.
So it's going to be an interesting race, and I think the one thing that I keep coming back to is a article penned by Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal, and you really have groups of consumers that are voting for the system as it is now, and people that fall into the basket of the unprotected, those that are facing major challenges economically in their hometowns, healthcare costs, and there is an element of desperation by, I think, these voters that really want to see a change happen. And I think that Trump has ridden that wave, and he's done it in ways that are completely unorthodox, and it's going to rock the system, continues to rock the system. But we're gonna see where this all nets out. I think we have to elect a president that is presidential, and we'll see where both candidates end up in the next several weeks. It's going to be interesting.
It really is. I like the way you put it, because so many of the people that I know that love Trump don't really love any of the remarks or the policies. They want him to be a human wrecking ball on a system they have just come to loathe. And my friends who don't love Hillary but are immovable from that's the way they're going to vote is the barbarians are at the gate. Rome must be preserved. No matter how horrible Rome is, we can't give up Rome. And I find that fascinating. I think this is an interesting time. I don't know if you're old enough, but I certainly am, to remember the late 60s and the attempt at revolution. And revolution looked like hippies, and revolution looked like free love, and revolution looked like stop the war and all of that. And I just feel that's in the air again. I feel there is a real big social event that is happening, and the election is the apparatus of the social event. So it's really nice having you on the show, man. How did you get?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How did you get so historically passionate? When did the passion ignite for you? Was it typically like fourth grade class, the first time you guys studied history? You just fell in love with it, or did it come out of your household? Where did your passion for history begin?
It was a teacher named Larry Sailing at Midland Park High School, New Jersey, and he just brought the subject to life. And I'm still astounded when you go back and you look at living standards or voting patterns, anything really historic, and how far we've come. And because when we sit here, we talk on a $500 cell phone that's more powerful than anything produced before 1995, for example, like later than that. And you have indoor air conditioning. You've got all these things and amenities. It's pretty easy when you look back in history at how people lived. And the other thing that fascinates me is I've always been fascinated with war history and how that has affected populations, civilizations. And it started with that. So the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the litany goes on, but it's and I think history itself is the best barometer on kind of where we are to gauge, I think, where our society is, where it can go, where it needs to improve. And there's a plethora of lessons that we can learn from the past.
Boy, you said it, man. You said it. When you were talking for a second, I almost wanted to throw in the Tigris and the Euphrates, and let's go all the way back. I mean, I love that. I think it's called The History of Us. It's like an 8-part documentary narrated by Josh Brolin. I think it's about a year old. And there's a chapter in it, a scene, where they show about 6 or 8 humans walking out of Mesopotamia. And it still boggles the mind that we came out of the water, we started out at the water, and we have just saturated the planet with everything. Yeah. And today, I think this is part of what you were saying, there's no limit to what you can see. It was tough when we were kids to have a textbook and a teacher. That was the universe of understanding. But today you can go anywhere momentarily, in just really a moment's time on the internet, and see some of this. Remarkable. All right, look, I love history, and I could talk to you all day. So thank you for giving a half an hour of your time. Congratulations on the book. And do you have a website where you would like to direct people to follow up with you? I've mentioned already, Vault 2112 by Kendall Smith, available on Amazon, highly rated, highly reviewed there. But if folks want to follow up with you, where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, a couple of places. You can go to percussionpublishing.com. And that is where our main offerings and our stories are held, and our latest works. You can go simply type in vault2112.com, and you go right to Amazon to buy the books. And you can also, to check out our latest work, you can go to trumpicana.com to check out our new novella, which is less than a month old, which we're excited about. And then Facebook. We
Excellent.
are publishing on Facebook.
You're a social media sensation, I bet, with what you write about and what you do. Thanks so much again for the time. Pleasure having you on the show. Kendall Smith, the book Vault 2112 and percussionpublishing.com. And, of course, the book is available on Amazon. Ed Tyll Show, Starcom Radio Network.